Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for When the Hands of Esau Replace Love the Stranger, the Corruption of Jewish Power with Rabbi Avidan Freedman. And I would like to thank our co-sponsors for today's program, Congregation Or Zion in Phoenix, and would love to welcome Andre Ivory to introduce today's guest speaker.
Thank you, Alex. It is a pleasure for Congregation Or Zion to co-sponsor this program this morning. It is my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Avidan Freedman. Rabbi Freedman completed a master's degree in Jewish education at the Azrieli Graduate School and received rabbinic ordination from Yeshivat Hovevei Torah and from the Israeli Rabbinate. He's an educator at the Shalom Hartman Institute's high school and post-high school program, and an activist who founded Yan Shuf, an organization dedicated to establishing moral limits for Israeli weapons exports. You can learn more about what Rabbi Freedman and his activism and his teachings at yanshuf.org. It's my pleasure, Rabbi Freedman, to welcome you here today, and I look forward to hearing your wonderful words.
Thank you so much, Andre, and thank you to all of you. It's an honor to be here with you. Good morning, good afternoon, or over here in Israel, in Efrat, it is good evening for us. I hope wherever all of you are healthy, in good health. These are difficult days in the world, in the Jewish world, certainly in Israel. And the words I have to share today, we will start to share them. Certainly, I hope we'll have resonance. I think in unexpected ways, or ways that I didn't necessarily expect beforehand. So the blurb that I had sent to Alex back in August read, "Trends in Israeli society today highlight the crucial choice that the Jewish state is faced with as the Jewish people face the moral challenge of power. More and more Jewish power reflects an approach to this challenge that is diametrically opposed to the approach espoused by the Torah." When I wrote that in August, it sounded very, very different, I have to say, than it does now after October 7th. And on the one hand, I have to put it out right away from the get-go to speak about the corruption of Jewish power in our world now, when the moral corruption that surrounds us and that attacks us is so much more live and egregious and offensive and threatening. It feels a little bit jarring to me. I'll be honest with you. Now is the time to speak about the corruption of Jewish power with everything else that's going on in the world. So that I want to recognize that discomfort. But on the other hand, I want to say that despite this, the Jewish ethic of rebuke is not to comfort ourselves by looking at the world and saying that the world isn't doing things right. It isn't to say because you have a beam in your eyes, I won't pay attention to the stick in between my teeth, but it's the very opposite. Even in these difficult times, it is to engage in self-reflection. And as the dating that of the description that I mentioned suggests, this is a deep problem. This is a deep challenge that Israel and that the Jewish people have been facing and continue to face. And the truth is that the events of October 7th shed a different kind of a light and add a different urgency and meaning to these issues that I hope that we'll get to. So what I want to do with you in the next 40 minutes or so is to touch on something that I think, as a human being, as a Jew, as a rabbi, as an activist, something that I feel has gone deeply wrong with our relationship with power, the Jewish people, the Jewish state's relationship with power. I want to speak about the ramifications of that, and I want to present some resources from our Jewish text that can help us to get back on track. I'll be totally honest with you. When I chose the title of the class, I didn't even know that it would fall out before this week's Parsha, the final Parsha in the book of Genesis, in the book of Reshit, Parshat Vayechi. I didn't know that. And you'll certainly believe me when I say that I didn't know back in August when I chose the title what our world was going to look like and the challenges that we were going to be facing. So it's really crazy that if we want to get right to the title of our talk today, the idea of the hands of Esau, and I want to access that through our parsha, the place to go is going to be the verse in this parsha that mentions none other than Hamas, literally. And the verse we have before us in Genesis 49, Shimon v'Levi achim, klei Hamas mechirotahem. Shimon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Their weapons are tools of Hamas. What's going on here? Jacob has gathered his children around him on his deathbed, and he is blessing them. Except that for the first few children, he doesn't bless them. He actually does something which sounds a lot more like cursing them and criticizing them. And what he is criticizing here with Shimon and Levi is their violence, either or maybe because both of the incidents of Shechem and what they did to the inhabitants of the city of Shechem, attacking the city in retribution, in vengeance for the rape of Dinah. And possibly, at least in the Midrash, it's also understood as a rebuke for their actions and their role in the sale of Joseph. But what does this curse mean? What are these klei Hamas? And so Rashi says the following. Rashi says, Omanot zo shel retzicha Hamas hu biyadehem. Mibirkat Esav hizo. Omanot shelohi. Vatem chamastem oto himeno. The art of murder has been stolen by you because it is from Esau's blessing. This art is his and you stole it from him. Hamas in Hebrew means it means theft. It means something which has been stolen. And what Yaakov is criticizing, what Jacob is criticizing, is that Shimon and Levi, by taking up arms, you have taken on the methods of Esau. Esau is the one who is given the blessing, you will live by your sword. And when Shimon and Levi, you acted vengefully, and you acted with violence against the people of Shechem, you took up arms. You took up the methods, the klei Hamas. You stole the methods of Esau. Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob. Hayadayim yedei Esau. Hands, that's the work of Esau. But what does it mean? I want to get to a more fundamental difference between Yaakov and Esau's perception of the world that is reflected in their final encounter, where we meet a brilliant play on words of this idea of kol, hakol, kol Yaakov. And in their final encounter, the final encounter between Yaakov and Esau, where Yaakov was frightened, he didn't know what to expect, he was sending gifts, but then when finally he meets Esau, they embrace, and then they have this conversation. And Esau says, Vayomer Esau, yesh li rav, achi yehi lecha asher lach. Esau says, I have so much, you don't need to send me all of these things, you can keep all of these things. And Yaakov responds to him, Al na, imna matzati chen beinecha, v'lakachta minchati miyadi, ki al ken ra'iti fanecha kir'ot pnei Elohim v'tirtzeni. He says, please take this from me. Kach na et birchati asher huvat lach, ki chanani Elohim, v'chi yesh li kol, v'yiftzar bo v'yikach. As opposed to Esau, who says, I have Rav, I have a lot. Yaakov says, yesh li kol, I have everything. Hakol, and here it's not with a kuf, meaning the voice of Jacob, but with a kaf, the all of Jacob. Jacob has a perspective on life that says, I have everything. Even if he has no thing, Jacob is able to say that I have everything. And so what I want to suggest is that the fundamental difference between the perspective of Esau, who uses his hands, and the perspective of Yaakov is the difference between quantity and quality. And this is a very important question when it comes to a person's approach to power. I don't know anyone who applied this question more precisely to our context in modern day Israel than David Ben-Gurion. So I want to listen to his words in order to understand, what does that mean, an approach to life which is about quantity, about having a lot, which is Esau, versus an approach which is about quality, and therefore is able to say, even without very much quantity, I have everything. Let's listen to some unbelievable words of David Ben-Gurion. And he wrote the following in an essay called Uniqueness and Destiny. Throughout the generations, since the time of Joshua until the wars of the IDF, we have been the few against the many. Even if we succeed, and I believe that we will, to bring millions more Jews to Israel, we will still be the few against the many. Only if we are faithful to our historic Jewish destiny and its vision will we stand. In our moral and intellectual capacities, the small and wondrous Jewish nation is no less than the greatest of nations, and our education must aim to develop these capacities to the maximum. Only by their strength will we survive in a world of competition, hatred, and oppression, and in their merit, we will be able to show the world a new path, a path of peace, justice, freedom, and human solidarity, not through lecturing or moralizing, but by being a model in our lives, our regime, and our policies. For it is incumbent on Israel to be a model nation. David Ben-Gurion is saying, as far as quantity goes, the Jewish people have never been all of that strong. We've always been an itsy-bitsy little people, and we always will be. If quantity is going to be what we depend on, we're in a lot of trouble. When we rely on quantity, we doom ourselves. And I want to take a moment and think about October 7th. Israeli government, the Israeli army, we were so certain in our power. We were so certain that we had so much power and we had so many means and technology, and we were doing everything so that in the balance of powers, we had much, much more. We had more power. We had more quantity. That's a conception that was destroyed on October 7th. It didn't happen. It didn't work. Now, some people say, well, do you know what the solution is? More power, more quantity. If we thought we had enough, we didn't have enough. We just need more and more and more. But Ben-Gurion is telling us, look in a different direction. Let's take a look at quality, what is remarkable about the Jewish people, and what we really need to depend on is going to be the quality of our understanding, of our intelligence, and also of our moral fiber. The quality of our moral fiber and our moral policies as a light unto all nations. Now, this idea is very, very deeply embedded in the Jewish ethic of power, which is what we're thinking about tonight or this morning. I would say, actually, it is the essence of the Jewish ethic of power, the idea of quality over quantity. And it goes back to the Torah. When the Torah speaks about a king, the institution of power, the Torah says the following: Rak lo yarbelo susim velo yashiv et ha'am Mitzrayim leman arbot sus, v'Adonai amar lachem lo tosifu nashuv baderech hazeh od, velo yarbelo nashim velo yasur levavo, v'chesef v'zahav lo yarbelo ma'od. He, the king, shall not keep many horses or send people back to Egypt to add to his horses. Horses is military power. Since God has warned you, you must not go back that way again. And he shall not have many wives, lest his heart go astray, nor shall he amass silver and gold to excess. Now, to have many wives isn't just about a certain sexual morality, but it is probably more so about diplomatic relationships. Because as we see very clearly, especially from Solomon, when you want to create a relationship with another country, you marry into the family. And so the Torah here is limiting, is saying you cannot have too much military power. You cannot have too much diplomatic power. You cannot have too much economic power. A statesman, any normal human being thinking about statescraft, thinking about politics, says this is crazy. Every country wants to have the maximum amount of power. That's what a country wants to amass in order to be as safe as possible, in order to take as good care as possible of its citizens. How can the Torah come and say that we are going to limit your quantities? And I think the prophet Isaiah echoes these limitations, and he really puts his finger on what it's all about. And Isaiah in the second chapter says this. It says, Vatimale artso kesef v'zahav ve'in ketzel otzrotav. Vatimale artso susim ve'in ketzel markavotav. Vatimale artso elilim lemaseh yadav ishtachavu la'asher asu etzbeotav. Isaiah echoes exactly the same ideas of the Torah, and he says the land, in criticizing the king, the land was full of silver and gold. There is no limit to their treasures. The land is full of horses. There is no limit to their chariots. The land is full of idols. The idols, again, is the relationship with other nations. And here he puts his finger on it. What does all of this mean at the end of the day? They bow down to the work of their hands, to what their own fingers have wrought. Make no mistake, Isaiah isn't just talking about the idea of idols. Isaiah is saying that this attitude, a quantitative approach to power, at the end of the day, what are you doing? You are worshiping the works of your own hands. You are worshiping what you have attained, the power that you have attained. And when you do that, your downfall is inevitable. That's realpolitik. That's how real life politics works. It's always just a matter of time until a bigger fish comes along. There's always going to be a bigger fish. That's the history of nations. You amass power, but at some point, someone else comes and takes over. And so Isaiah finishes this rebuke, and he says, "Vayishach adam vayishpal ish." Human beings shall be humbled, and mortal brought low. Oh, do not forgive them, al tisalahem, or do not raise them up. That's the quantitative approach. It's a real life approach. It's a political approach to power. It's what the world does. But if we as the Jewish people are meant to be an eternal people, an am hanetzach, we are supposed to bring a different voice to the world. We are meant to bring the voice of Jacob, Hakol Kol Yaakov. And this is the voice not of quantity, but of quality. What does that mean? And what does that look like? Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Cook, spoke about this voice, and he spoke also about the chance of this voice being heard in the world. And Rabbi Cook said the following: we left world politics of a coercion that hid within it an inner desire, meaning when the Jewish people was exiled, when we left the political stage, we were coerced, we were forced to, but there was something in there that there was a hidden desire, that was something that we actually needed, until the right time comes, when it will be possible to run a kingdom without evil and barbarism. This is the time for which we hope. The wait is necessary. Our souls are revolted by the horrific sins of political leadership during bad times. Rabbi Cook is speaking during the First World War, and he is summing up thousands of years of human suffering and bloodshed at the hands of all kinds of different political sources and political powers. And he is saying politics has always equaled barbarism and evil, and that wasn't something the Jewish people could have anything to do with. But, he says, now the time comes very near that the world will progress, and we can already start to prepare ourselves that we will be able to run our regime on the foundations of good, wisdom, honesty, and clear divine inspiration. Jacob sent Esau his cloak of majesty. Let my master pass before me. And here Rabbi Cook is referencing the very verses that we saw, that interaction, that final interaction between Jacob and Esau. And he says, the Midrash says, that Jacob passed over a cloak of majesty, the cloak of sovereignty, to Esau. It is not proper for Jacob to be involved in politics when it must be saturated with blood and the demands being skillful at evil. We only received the basic necessary foundations in order to found a nation, but then we were ejected from sovereignty. We have been spread out among the non-Jews and planted among them deep in the ground until the songbird's time come and the turtle dove is heard in our land. Rabbi Kook is saying, excuse me, for a very long time, this world was a world that was dominated by the hands of Esau, the hands of Esau, Yedei Esau. And so we handed over the keys. We knew there was no way to create a state, a nation built on ethics. But he felt that the time was coming very soon. What was actually coming that he didn't see was the Holocaust. He was writing this during the First World War. Of course, the Holocaust doesn't represent human progress, but the horrors of the Holocaust and the tragedies of the Holocaust were able to do somewhat for humanity what the horrors of World War I unfortunately did not do. And to a certain extent, out of the horrors of the Holocaust started to be developed in humanity international humanitarian rights and international conventions that were meant to prevent another Holocaust from happening. Rav Kook's idea that the world was progressing actually started to be developed, but his vision wasn't for the world, it was for us. And some years later, Israel is established. From that point, I think that Rav Kook's words changed from being a prediction to being a test. It's the test of our power. And the question is, and the test is, are we ready to return to power? Are we ready to take back our cloak? If we have the courage to ensure that our policies as a Jewish state will be guided by the values of the good and wisdom and honesty, then it means that we are ready to return to power. But if we refuse, if we insist on continuing with the hands of Esau, then what Rabbi Kook's words are saying is essentially, we are not ready yet. This is our test. And even if you would argue that if we would assume the hands of Esau, it's something that will work for us, it would be something that it's what we need to do. That's the argument. All of these prophecies are very nice to study, and all of these philosophies are very nice, but at the end of the day, the argument always goes, well, there's war and there are people's lives on the line, and this isn't how we need to work. We need to work the way the world works. But I want to argue that if we ignore this moral call to ethical use of power, if we ignore it, then even if physically we survive, we would be destroyed. We would be destroying ourselves because we would no longer be us. These are the words of former Chief Rabbi Herzog, and the words on the screen right now were published in an unbelievable collection of statements the collection is called Against Terror. And these were some more than 100 statements after Rabbi Herzog signed on to a letter with 240 other major figures decrying and condemning Jewish acts of reprisal and revenge. We're talking about in the 1930s, before the state of Israel, where Arab terror is just starting to really hit the Jewish people. And within that context, one voice within the Jewish state, in pre-state Jewish community, is we need to do whatever it takes in order to show them that we're serious. We need to do whatever it takes in order to show them that they don't want to mess with us. And if that means even killing innocents, that's what it's going to take. And against those calls, Rabbi Herzog said, what value will the building of our national home have if it will be built by the sword being used against innocent people walking in the streets of Jewish cities? What value is that what we have returned to the land of Israel and to the state of Israel? Is that what it means to do it? Even if it would ensure our survival, it wouldn't ensure our survival because we wouldn't be us. We wouldn't be doing what the Jewish people is meant to be doing. This is the test. And the test has many versions and many stages and many variations, this test of power. It's a new test for the Jewish people. It's one that we haven't faced for 2,000 years as a people. And some of the time we do better on these tests, and some of the times we do much, much worse. And some of the tests are easier, and some are harder, and they're easy in different ways. Now, as I said, and as Andre mentioned, when I originally planned this talk, it came from activism of a number of years around one particular test, which I feel, unfortunately, and it hurts me to say this, as a flag bearing and a flag waving Zionist who made Aliyah, but there is a test that one of these tests we're failing at quite miserably. And what I wanted to speak to about was that test, and also the way that failure was starting to leak into Israeli society in even more direct and sinister ways. The test I wanted to speak to about was about weapons sales. The fact that, unlike any other Western country, essentially, Israel does not have any moral limitation on arms sales, on its weapon sales, which is enshrined in law. Meaning Israel, the state of Israel, is one of the 10 largest weapons exporters in the world. And weapons export isn't a very maybe pretty business, but certainly after October 7th, I think I can state it with even more certainty, but it was never something I actually questioned. Weapons in our broken world do have a legitimate and moral use, as far as I'm concerned. As far as my belief system is concerned, there is legitimate use for weapons, and that's to defend human lives. And so as long as we are making weapons to defend innocent people, and even if we would be selling weapons that go to defend people, I don't have a problem with that. I would call that a success on this test of power. That's important to do. But Israel also sells weapons to regimes that have no sense of human rights, that commit brutal human rights violations. And that means that, practically speaking, I find myself, as a Jew, as an Israeli citizen, a silent and unwilling accessory, a partner in these human rights violations, in genocide, in murder, in rape. I as a member of Israeli society, as a voter in Israeli elections, if my government allows Israeli arms dealers to sell weapons to other governments that they know with relative certainty are going to misuse them, are not going to use them morally, then I'm a partner. I am complicit in those crimes in some way. And to me, this is really, as I see it, the very worst failure of Rav Kook's test, because the way that people justify this policy, which is, again, it's not that this is happening against the law. This is the policy of the state of Israel to allow these sales. And this policy is justified in the name of realpolitik, in the name of this is how the world works, in the name of, well, we need power. We need all the friends we can get. We need all of the money we can get. We need all of the power we can get. And so that's just the way the world works. To me, this is a failure of the moral test. This is an insistence that the world is still managed and is still run completely and only by barbarism and by evil. And this is an insistence that there is no way to run a country based on the principles of good and ethics. And the truth is that as far as this issue goes of arms sales, the process that Rav Kook talks about is really happening in the world, because the world has actually been getting better. It wasn't too long ago, it wasn't much more than a decade ago, that an international treaty was signed, an international agreement was signed in order to limit arms sales to human rights violators. And that is a treaty that 110 states in the world are committed to. And unfortunately, Israel isn't there yet. But so this is a situation where countries have made that step, and instead of leading the way, instead of being the light unto the nations on this issue, unfortunately, tragically, painfully, Israel is lagging behind, and Israel finds itself with Russia and with China as far as its policies. That is a failure that I have, in many ways, increasingly over the last 7 years, tried to do everything that I can to fix, because I feel like that is a failure that the Jewish people, that the people of the state of Israel really just, for the most part, don't know about and don't understand the kinds of things that we're complicit with. And I really have confidence in our people that when people know about this and when they understand this, it's something that we don't want to be involved with. We don't want to be engaged with it. We don't want to be implicated in all of these crimes. This isn't the Israel that we dream of. This isn't the Israel that we believe in. This isn't the Israel that we aspire to, see as a light unto the nations. What's hard about this particular failure, I would say, one of the things that's very hard to get people to understand it and to care about it is that it's far away. It's far away, and it isn't something that is seen, and it's something that people don't hear about, and it's something that's, I have to say, is actually covered up pretty well by the powers that are interested in covering it up. Even before October 7th, we started to see very clearly, even here in Israel, how this concept of Jewish power, the concept of power as a good in and of itself that doesn't need and doesn't call for any moral restraints, we started to see it as a political power and a political party, Otzma Yehudit, that was accepted into the mainstream. And even before October 7th, we saw that it led to bloodshed. It led to bloodshed within, and an allowance of bloodshed within the Arab-Israeli community, and bloodshed that was legitimized by many figures within the government of Israeli extremists attacking Palestinians. Those actions that happened here, literally in my backyard in Israel, I see them as part of this same test and part of this same conception, this misconception of what Jewish power is all about. The idea that we need to just have as much power as possible and exercise it as strongly as possible, and we don't need to bother ourselves with any moral limitations. But now, post October 7th, this test that maybe we had beforehand the chance to practice at, to get good at, but we ignored, it has returned really right in our face. And this test of power challenges us on two very important levels in our world post October 7th. First, there is a challenge of how, and there is a challenge of whether. There is the challenge of how to fight morally against an immoral enemy. This is a very, very difficult challenge. And people can debate, and people can take different positions on how good Israel is doing at that and how poorly Israel is doing at that. But what needs to be recognized is, first of all, that the asymmetry of this conflict makes it extraordinarily difficult. And number two, that this is a conversation that's going on in Israel. You can say that they're making the wrong decisions at the end of the day, but there's no question that this is a live conversation. I have to say, as far as as I see it, again, as someone who has no qualms about criticizing Israeli policy, I'm very proud of how the Israeli military establishment has been very clear that they are doing their utmost not to target civilians. That doesn't mean that civilians have been killed. They have been killed, and many have been killed, and it is tragic. But that is an outgrowth of the way that Hamas is fighting us. But the fact that the Israeli military establishment says that we are not aiming to, and we don't target, and we do everything we can, and we go out of our way to do, again, that's a big debate. People can take different sides of that. But the fact that Israel is struggling with that, I think there's no doubt that Israel is struggling with. That's the first challenge of the how. Then there's the second challenge, the more fundamental challenge, and that's the challenge of whether Israel needs to try to act morally. Not how to act morally, but whether, when we're facing such depravity, such immorality, does Israel really need to still play by the rules? And you hear voices that say, against this enemy, there's no such thing as morality. At this point, all we need to respond with is just pure power, because that's all they understand, and that's all that's understood in this world, etc., etc. These were the very ideas that Rabbi Herzog was coming out against. This was the very attitude that Jacob, our forefather, was coming out against. These are the Klei Hamas. These are the very tools of Hamas. And perhaps what Hamas would like more than anything is for us to abandon who we are and to adopt the hands of Esau, and to start to fight this battle with the hands of Esau. And that, as we have said, to do that is a threat to our existence, and it's a threat to our identity. It's a threat to who we are as the Jewish people. What I see as an incredible thing is that I think that in the context of this issue, as difficult as it is, as much as Jewish lives are on the line, Jews in Israel, Jews outside of Israel, recognize that this is something that we need to hold on to. Again, there are extremist voices within Israel, but the mainstream, the military leadership, the parents who are sending their children to war and who are not seeing them all come home, can't tell you how many funerals I've been. I've been in more funerals in the last 2 months than my whole life. My whole life. Last night, I was at a heartbreaking funeral of a beautiful young boy who was a fighter. He was a warrior, but he was also a gentle, gentle soul. And Israeli soldiers and Israeli parents and Israeli military establishment understand this is what our identity is. This was a soldier who could wake up early in the morning to pray and to study a page of Talmud a day, to study Daf Yomi before he went into battle, before he risked his life, and ultimately before he lost his life. So I think the very powerful voice that we are hearing within Israel today is holding on to this Kol Yaakov, is holding on to the qualitative approach, is holding on to the moral and to the ethical approach, even when we are suffering for it in a very extreme way. And so I feel like I have a certain amount of optimism that as we come out of this, and when we come out of this, and when we apply these questions outward, that we'll also be able to see that we'll also be able to see that when we talk about where our weapons are going, we need to maintain these same kinds of moral commitments that we are struggling with and that we are maintaining now. And I just want to finish by going back to Yehuda. This brings us back to our parsha, and this brings us back to Yehuda, because Jacob, and with this we will end. Jacob rejects Simeon and Levi. He rejects Shimon and Levi. He rejects them as leaders. He doesn't reject them as children. He maintains them as children, but he rejects them as leaders because of their anger and because of their revenge. We can't have our leaders working through Yedei Esau, working through the hands of Esau. It can't be. And so Jacob passes them over and moves on to his next son. And he chooses Yehuda to lead. And why is Yehuda the one who is chosen? Because Yehuda knows how to admit his mistakes and how to assume responsibility. We see it again and again with Yehuda in the story of Tamar, with Yehuda in the story of Joseph. We see again and again that Yehuda has the ability to take a step back, to admit his mistakes, and to assume responsibility. Now he still has his hands. It says Yadcha be'oref oivecha. He has hands, and when he needs to, Yehuda knows how to attack. When he needs to, he knows how to attack in order to defend, but when it is justified, not out of revenge, not out of anger. But if you look at what Jacob focuses on with the powers of the lion, it's quite remarkable, because you think of the lion, the power of the lion, think of the power to rip its prey apart and to attack. And what Jacob here speaks about is actually something very different. You, O Judah, your brothers shall accede to you. Your hand shall be on the nape of your foes. Your father's son shall bow low to you. Judah is a lion's whelp. From prey, my son, you have risen. Gur aryeh Yehuda miteref b'ni alita. He talks about not the attack, but the retraction. Kara ravatz ke'aryeh u'chilavim miyakimenu. The power of the lion is not expressed in its attack. Even someone very, very weak can attack, and someone very weak feels like they always need to attack. But the power of the lion is to know when attack is needed and when you can step back and when you can move back and when you can rest. And so what really my prayer and my blessing for all of us is that in these dark days we take on the mantle of Judah, we take on the mantle of Yehuda as our model of leadership, not anger, not revenge, to know how to admit mistakes and take responsibility for them, to know how to defend ourselves morally and how to act and to work for peace morally. And I pray that these are lessons that we take with us now and that we also continue to take with us in the future, please God, in more peaceful times. So I want to thank all of you for listening so much. And now we'll open up the floor to questions. I'd be very, very happy to answer any questions you have, certainly about the more practical aspects of my activism or anything else that you have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Freedman. Yes, like you mentioned, we'd love to open it up to questions or comments. Please feel free, anyone, to raise your hand and we can call on people to unmute, or you can always use the chat as well.
So I see that there are a few questions on the chat. I'll respond to them in the meantime.
Thank you.
They're not on the chat. I received them as direct messages. Oh, so do people want me to answer these direct messages to everyone? Yes? Okay. So one question I was asked is, don't you think there are a lot of Jews who have a double standard in which they think they must act morally towards Jews, but not towards non-Jews, especially Arabs and Iranians? I think there are a lot of people who have double standards. Absolutely. I think a lot of those people are Jews. A lot of those people are all kinds of other people. I think the double standard is something that human beings seem to have a real knack at, and Jews are no different. And I think we need to aspire differently. And I think that to me, it's very clear when you look at the Torah, that the Torah has an ethic of war. And the ethic of war that was given in the times of Torah isn't the correct ethic for now, just as any of the laws of the Torah as they were given then is not the Judaism that we practice now. Judaism is a Torat Chaim. That's the group that myself and Rav Shmuley are part of together, and really Rav Shmuley created and founded. Torat Chaim means that it's a Torah of life, which also is about the ethic of the Torah and also is about the development of the Torah. But I think when understood correctly, at least to me, it's very clear that the Torah has demands of ethics in war, of sanctity and purity in war, which is not only related to Jews, which is related to non-Jews, and which is related to enemies, and enemies who also want to destroy us, or enemy nations. There are still moral limits and moral guidelines. I think there are double standards, and I think there are also moral failures, again, of all human beings, and we need to draw on the best that our tradition has to offer in order to aspire to the best we can be. Sandra?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for your talk and for the work that you're doing. This is a follow-up question, actually, to what you were just asked. Could you talk further about the issue of quantity versus quality of power in regard to the response right now that the Israeli government and military is giving to Hamas? I am, of course, concerned about how the quantity seems to be overwhelming or overtaking the question of or category of quality. And I'd like to hear you talk some more about that.
Absolutely. I think, first of all, I want to reiterate what I said, that it's tragic. I am certainly not a party, as you can imagine from my words. I don't agree with those voices that say we need to completely wipe out Gaza and ignore any difference between combatants and non-combatants. That said, there is a way in which the focus on quality here might actually lead to greater quantity of casualties. In some sense, again, the numbers are horrifying, but in some sense, a single innocent human being is also horrifying. I am horrified by the unjustified killing of one human being and of 10 human beings and of one child and of 10 children. And in Jewish tradition, every single human being is an entire world. And that's part of the quality, right? That's part of the quality thing. So 20,000 is awful and one is completely awful. But as long as, I'll say like this, as from my perspective, as long as what is really guiding the Israeli military response is this is what must be done in order to end the genocidal threat against the Jewish people, then I can see the moral justification for that. And I think that anyone who denies the genocidal threat against the Jewish people, where Hamas killed as many people as they possibly could, but if they would have been able to, if Israel wouldn't have had any arms, if Israel would be a demilitarized state on October 7th, then I wouldn't be here giving this talk either. There was no sense of wanting to stop at a certain military goal in Hamas's attack. It was a genocidal attack of we will kill as many people as we possibly can without any, and that is Hamas's goal. That is their stated goal. They don't even hide it. And so as much capacity as they have to do that, they will do it. And so I think there is absolutely a moral justification to say we can't allow a situation where that's a possibility. I think it's tragic. I think the tragedy and the moral responsibility lays at the feet of Hamas. That doesn't mean that we can just do whatever we want and act however we want. It means we need to do our utmost, but we need to be clear about it. If Hamas's leaders now would all give themselves up to the Israeli army to be judged, not to be killed, if they would all surrender and say we have given up, the Gazan Strip will be given over to someone else. We don't know who, but we as Hamas have absolutely no moral legitimacy, and we are giving up. There would not be a single Gazan who would be hurt. There wouldn't be a single one. And if they would have done that before October 7th or a day after, slaughtering thousands of Israelis in cold blood, the same thing. There would not be a single Gazan hurt. And so there is a moral responsibility we have, but we can't ignore the moral responsibility that Hamas has for those deaths. And I wish that the world would exert all of its pressure so that Hamas would give up, as you know, and be destroyed. I mean, I don't even need them to be destroyed. I don't mind if they would go and sit in jail, but that the Gazan people shouldn't be led by those who are leading them to genocide and who are taking every single resource that was given to them over the last 18 years and dedicating it to that genocide.
May I follow up quickly with a question about how you respond then to the accusation that Israel is practicing genocide as well?
I think it's false. I think that it is false, and specious and unsubstantiated and unbased. I think that people have been accusing Israel of genocide for a long time. It didn't start. People have been accusing Israel of all kinds of different genocides in Gaza, a slow genocide in Gaza. There have been accusations, and and all of those accusations willfully ignore the moral responsibility of the other side. Because if Israel was interested in genocide, then what I said before a minute ago wouldn't be true. If Israel was interested in the genocide of the Palestinian people, then they wouldn't accept the the giving up. I'm missing the English word for how do you say? I lost some of my English.
Surrender?
Surrender. That's the word I'm looking for. Israel wouldn't accept the surrender of Hamas because they want to commit genocide, but Israel doesn't. Israel doesn't want to. I think the large, again, there are extremists. Those extremists are empowered by these kinds of things, but the majority, the very, very large majority and consensus of Israelis would be very happy to lay down our arms and would be very happy to live side by side with Palestinians. And by the way, if Israelis were convinced that we could live safely, and this is something that polls have shown consistently for decades, if Israelis were convinced that we could live peacefully side by side, and that Hamas had, or that the Palestinians had abandoned the dream of destroying Israel, then a large majority of Israelis would also be willing to accept a Palestinian state, as Israeli leaders were in 1947.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to jump in with a question or a comment?
There is one more question here if you want me to read it out.
Sure.
Does the Torah or our rabbis address how to respond when circumstances, such as those of today, lead Jews to dismiss spiritual vision and purpose, such as you have framed for us, as naive or foolish, when fear and threat encourage an abandonment of these voices in favor of the tools of power? This is a very real challenge for us today. I agree. Obviously, I think it is for me as a rabbi. I feel like it is the challenge, and for my thinking about Israel, I think it is one of the major challenges that I try to engage in. That we have to a very we as I said, we fail at too many of these tests. We do not have the confidence of a Lion of Judah that we can be moral. Now, I agree. I understand where that's coming from. I understand that the Jewish people are a traumatized people. I understand that we're deeply, deeply afraid of another Holocaust in a very real way, and obviously, events like October 7th prove that thesis over and over again. The idea that we're at constant existential threat. It's very, very hard. You know, when you think of Maslow's pyramid, when people feel like their lives are in danger, it's very hard for them to get to the peak of the pyramid and to speak about morality. And I think, you know, if you picture the pyramid of Maslow, I think that Judaism, that the ethic of Jewish power actually flips the pyramid and says that our power is, and this is what Ben-Gurion was saying, and this is what Rabbi Herzog was saying, that our power is based on that. How do you convince people of that? I don't know. I'm trying to convince people of it every single day, by talking, by education, by writing, by speaking to you all, and you speak to others. The prophets tried also. They failed. The prophets failed. They did their best, but they failed. And so we know we have to do our best, and whether we fail or not isn't necessarily up to us. We certainly do need to do our best, and I extend my hand in solidarity and partnership to anyone willing to take it and to take up, because I really do feel like this is the challenge of Jewish power. This is the challenge of Jewish sovereignty, which we didn't face for 2,000 years, and now we have. This is what brought me to Israel. We have the opportunity to do it, and please God, we'll do it right. We'll do better.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Freedman, thank you so much for leading us in this class and learning today. And thank you all for being here. Our next program will be January 4th, Introduction to Dreams and Kabbalah with Dr. David Sanders. So we hope you can all tune into that as well, and hope you all have a good rest of your day. Take care.